Oh, buddy, how I love you. The Mandalorian, the equipment and weapon expert. But alas, with the presence of blue decks and yellow decks in the meta, the Mandalorian struggles to keep upgrades on its early game units and get to his powerful deploy on 6. If you've been following the deck profile videos I've put out lately, you know that I love the Mandalorian. However, in my testing, I hit a wall. I think the Mandalorian has a lot of potential. However, we just need a few more sets of upgrades and options to really make him sing. So I put the Mandalorian away for now, and in its place, I've recently jumped on the Gar Saxon bandwagon. Now, this personality offers a kind of effortless synergy with equipment. Not only does it give you a +1 damage passively without you doing anything, it is very proactive, meaning I can slow play my opponent and still squeak in that extra damage at the end of combat. He also offers a way for you to cycle equipment. Unlike Mando, which has always been a big struggle with the Mandalorian, being able to not only keep units on the field, but also upgrades in your hand to be able to use on those units. Well, Gar Saxon is kind of helping you in two different ways. He's giving you a different method, since the units only need to be upgraded to gain the benefit of Gar Saxon, versus the Mandalorian requires you to play an upgrade from your hand. So this line of play with Gar Saxon allows you to utilize shielded very, very well. Any unit that is shielded is automatically going to come out with +1 damage. It makes certain units much, much more powerful that we're going to go over. I think Gar Saxon has a ton of potential, and we're only going to see him get better. We've already been seeing Gar Saxon Yellow have some success in showdowns. However, I wanted to jump on Gar Saxon Red because I really enjoy the red equipment cards. So without further ado, let's get into the deck profile. Greetings Internet, DDA here, and I'm going to try something new with these deck profile videos. Instead of breaking it up into units, events, and upgrades, I'm going to break it up into the stages of the game, which are early game, mid game, and late game. And of course, that is defined by the cost of the card. I think it's a better representation to talk about all the early game cards and then all the mid game cards and etc. So that's how we're going to be constructing the deck profile videos moving forward. So just a brief, because I know that I've seen a lot of Gar Saxon Yellow decks pop around into the meta. The reason I decided to build this Gar Saxon Red deck is a few reasons. Mostly because I really, really like the red equipment. Additionally, disabling Fangfighter is actually just an S tier card in the current meta with the amount of Boba armor and Darksaber running around. So I felt like just to have a better place in the current meta that I wanted to run red to run disabling Fangfighter in this deck, because it is a slower deck and it really is looking to get that kind of incremental value out of the +1 damage throughout the entire game. Gar Saxon actually scales incredibly well into the late game, unlike the Mandalorian. The Mandalorian struggles to scale into the late game because he's limited by the 6 HP exhausting, so he can't really exhaust late game units, whereas Gar Saxon is going to make all your late game units have extra power and just scale really well. So to start out here with the early game units, we're going to start out with 3 of the Kylo's TIE Silencer. This is a pretty standard unit. There's no real synergy in this deck with this unit. It's not as if we're self-milling or discarding like Kylo does. This is just a 2-drop, 3-power space unit that we're playing. That is an easy answer to both A-Wing and Red 3. Of course, those decks are pretty prominent in the meta. This deck has a really, really good matchup against anything mid-range. I believe that anything mid-range and control, I believe this deck can actually win. It does struggle a little bit against aggro, so this is one of the cards that we play to help in the aggro matchup. Additionally, most of our upgrades can actually go on space units. That's another reason why I really like the red upgrades as compared to, say, the blue upgrades. The red upgrades are actually incredibly powerful to put on space units. For example, throwing Arm to the Teeth on Kylo's TIE Silencer makes it a 6-2 with a potential of 8 total damage from just this one unit in space. So very, very strong. I have actually run the table with this card a few times. It's great to trade into A-Wing. If you drop this down turn 1, if you have initiative, your opponent pretty much can't play A-Wing because you can instantly answer it and still survive. Next up, for our early game units, we have a single copy of Moisture Farmer. I've gone up and down on this card. I think this card is incredible in the aggro matchup. However, in the other matchups I found, and honestly, even in the aggro matchup, sometimes I struggle actually getting this off. If you don't have an upgrade in your hand, attacking for 0 is very, very weak in terms of your tempo. So often I found, because I did play this at 3 originally in this deck, I found that just in order to keep initiative or for some reason to mitigate even more damage against my opponent, I was unable to attack with the Moisture Farmer. So this is not a card that is overwhelming in this deck. It's a good card, which is why it sits at 1, and then I actually have the other 2 copies in the sideboard for the aggro matchup to help me flood the board and get that early game healing. You may be tempted to play many copies of Moisture Farmer and then, say, drop a 1-cost upgrade from your hand. Turn 1, we do play 1-cost upgrades in this deck. I would not recommend that for several reasons. Mostly because when you kind of invest a double card play into 1 card turn 1, there's just so much counterplay your opponent can do to stop you. They're automatically gonna get initiative against you because you're doing 2 plays turn 1. They're gonna claim on you. Then they're gonna answer your Moisture Farmer as their first action. 2 for 1 you. It happens pretty much every time I do it. So I would not recommend dropping Moisture Farmer and an upgrade on a Moisture Farmer turn 1. It's a tempting play. It's a risky play. It can work out, but it has not worked out for me. So that's my opinion on that. Next up, we have 3 copies of the Pike Sentinel. Now, there are spoilers happening, and this card is in here, of course, to help you slow down the game, especially late game if you need that little bit of extra Sentinel to throw out. However, there is the recently spoiled Bo-Katan Kreese, that 2-drop unit, the 2-drop 2/3 that gets the +1 in Saboteur when you have Mandalorians and Troopers. I would pretty much replace this card with that card when it comes out in set 3. But for now, the Pike Sentinel is sitting in here as a decent early game drop that lets you be able to slow the game down a little bit with the Sentinel. And of course, it's always amazing to throw Electro Staff on a Sentinel early game. But again, always watch out for those early answers that your opponent may have to 2 for 1 you. Next up, we have 3 copies of the Death Star Stormtrooper. This is in here to help the aggro matchup. This is basically the red Greedo. Really good card. I rarely upgrade it. It's mostly in here to serve as a unit trader to clear out the early game units, get you to those mid game units, and with enough resources to start upgrading and start really pushing out the major damage. I have done a lot of damage with this card, and I have, say, double turn 1 played Moisture Farmer, Death Star Trooper. That's a really good play against aggro. I like this at 3 compared to Moisture Farmer because of the 3 power. But of course, in the aggro match, if you end up siding in the 2 Moisture Farmers, you'll have 6 1-drops that you could potentially do a double 1-drop play turn 1. Really strong. Next up, we have 2 copies of Dr. Pershing. I really like this card in slower decks, mid-range decks, control decks. It really works out here in these equipment-based decks because your opponent 2 for 1ing you is always an issue. So this draw engine comes in to help you a lot. Plus, he has a huge body, with the 5 HP. So if you wanted to, say, attach a Ruthlessness on him and kind of run the table with the 3 power, with the 5 HP, you can certainly do that too against aggro decks, like if you have no other option and you happen to draw a Pershing. But the reason we only play it at 2 is because, again, we generally have a good matchup against mid-range and control in this deck. However, I wanted the Dr. Pershing in here to really help us push out the card advantage, just to give us a card advantage engine for the upgrades in this deck. Upgrade decks definitely need a card advantage engine, and Dr. Pershing is one of the greatest card advantage engines in the game. So glad that guy is getting love lately. Continuing with the non-units now, the early game non-units. We are playing 3 copies of Ruthlessness. This card is the main reason why I built this Gar Saxon red deck, because the ratio for power here is off the charts. You pay 1 resource for 3 damage, 2 damage, and +1 from the Gar Saxon ability. Additionally, you get 2 damage anytime that you defeat one of your opponent's units. Just incredible value engine for this deck. The more I play it, the more I love it. It can go on space units. It is non-unique, so you can play multiple copies of it on the same unit, or just multiple copies in general. Incredible card. Well worth running red with Gar Saxon. This card is so strong in this deck. Like I said, aggro decks wish that they got the ratio of 1 for 3 damage. We get it in this deck. Really strong card. We are also running another amazing red upgrade, 2 Armed to the Teeth. This is mainly in here for the smuggle, because it gives you card advantage with the upgrades. So it gives you a different form of a card engine for upgrades. It does cost 4, which means it's very slow. But in the right situation with the right developed board, you can push out 5 damage the first turn that you play this card. Very strong 5 damage. But it is, again, non-unique, can go on space units. You'll see that's a common theme throughout this deck. We want to give ourselves options in both the ground and the space arena for upgrades. This is one of the best ones. Additionally, we play 2 copies of Electro Staff. Now, this card is one of the quintessential blue upgrade cards. One of the most amazing. Definitely has the highest ceiling. Ridiculously strong to put on Sentinel units. Ridiculously strong to put on Super Commando Squad. There's a lot of combos that you can do with this card. Put it on Gar Saxon, because you know they're probably going to attack Gar Saxon. Give him 7 power. Very strong. We only do play it at 2 because it is non-vehicle, so it can't go on any space units. And there are several situations where you would rather a different upgrade, like a 1-cost upgrade, and things like that. So we do only play it at 2, but I could definitely see it at 3. Then kind of closing out the upgrades for the deck, we do run a single copy of Brutal Tradition. This is, again, another kind of card engine, card advantage engine that we run in this deck. So I would not play more than 1 of this, just because I never, ever want to see 2 of this in a game. Never, ever want to see 2 of it in a game. It is good for combos at 1 to squeak out a little bit of extra damage. I enjoy it. It's been working out well. And again, another upgrade that can go on space units. And if you put this on Kylo's Tie, Kylo's Tie actually becomes a 5/4 in space. Very strong. That 2 HP is very strong. So it's actually a 2/2 upgrade in Gar Saxon. Very strong. And then my 1 Flavor Spice card. I really like this card. I've gone up and down on it. I started originally with 3 copies. I went to 2, and now I'm at 1. Just because I've been trying to add more units into the deck and play a little bit more removal in the deck, as we'll go over later. But we do run Jango Fett in this deck, so that is a good combo with bounties. But this is kind of my flex card right now, so I'm deciding if I want to swap this out. Now again, the ceiling of this card is incredibly high in Gar Saxon. You can squeak out 4 damage with a single resource. because you're getting a double upgrade. So you're double activating Gar Saxon ability with the 2 experience. When you get this to pop off, it's incredible. The problem is making it pop off. And then Jango Fett does help do that. So, but I can see, for example, I could see the 3rd copy of Armed to the Teeth in this place. I could see the 3rd copy of Electro Staff. Additionally, if you were in a heavy Sabine meta, I could see Top Target to have a place in the main deck in this deck. There are options. Right now, I'm an aggressive player, so I like the Rich Reward, and it synergizes. I want to live the dream. I want to live the dream of my Jango Fett. So that's it for the early game plays that we have. Now going into the mid-game plays. We're going to start out with, I mentioned earlier, we have 2 copies of Disabling Fangfighter. I think this is one of the most important cards in the meta right now. Upgrades are everywhere, and this is one of the best cards to answer those upgrades. If you're playing red, you need to be main decking this. If you're not playing red, you need to be considering red to just play this card. That's how important this card is in the meta. Just a great card. I played at 3, but I don't have the space. Next up, one of the greatest units in this deck is the Client. The Client suffers from being slightly too slow sometimes. It does come out with a shield, so it's going to get that +1 from Gar Saxon immediately. So this means the Client is going to be able to trade into pretty much any early game unit free of charge, take it out, and then also be available to you to either upgrade with its 5 HP and huge butt, or it lets you use that bounty to kind of catch up either against a low to the ground mid-range or aggro deck. The Client also does combo with Jango Fett again. They were a match made in heaven and they love each other. The Client is incredible in this deck. If you like the Client as a card, this is the best deck to utilize the Client for sure. I found in my testing I needed to add a little bit more space into this deck, so I did add 2 copies of the Punishing One. The stat line for this space unit is just excellent. It has the Millennium Falcon stat line. 3-4 for 3, crazy strong. Great to put upgrades on. It also has that readying feature of it if you do happen to defeat a unit with an upgrade. We do run some bounties in here, so it can you can potentially force this activation. Yeah, so it is worthy to note that it does not combo with the Client. Having a bounty is not considered being upgraded. Bounty is a keyword. It's just that most bounties are upgrades, so you kind of associate the two. But it is worthy to note that putting the Client on someone is not enabling this ability. It actually has to be an upgrade. So that is something to note and why we only play 2 of this. But again, the stat line is so amazing, and we play such great upgrades for space units, that this card has been a powerhouse. Even if you only get 1 ready, like 1 ready of that unit can just win you the game. Continuing here with the mid-game units, we run 3 Long Pikes. Card is so spectacular in Gar Saxon. It's incredible. I have nothing bad to say about this card. Stat line is ridiculous for 4, 4-6. That's crazy. That's better than Kanan. 10 stats for 4 cost. That's way above curve. It has a smuggle for only 1 cost more. It's like when they were printing this card, they just decided to overvalue every single element of this card. It's crazy. Smuggle for 1 cost more, and then the ability on attack to add shields. You can add a shield to itself to increase your damage. You can add a shield to anything you want to protect it, and then activate Gar Saxon ability. It's so powerful. Just pick a unit that your opponent has on the board that you are going to leave out for the remainder of the game, and then literally stack so many shields on them. For example, when I'm playing against Sabine, I will use this and then just throw all my shields on their R2. Or just pick an early game unit that you don't care about. Or say if you're not answering the space arena, just throw shields on their space units because you know you're not going to answer them. And then potentially just use a removal card to just bypass all the shields anyway. I can't overstate how powerful this card is in this deck. It's overstated, it's undercosted, and it activates Gar Saxon ability. 10 out of 10. Closing out here with the mid-game units, we have 3 copies of Jango Fett. Card is amazing. Gives you a draw engine for your upgrades. Great card itself to have upgrades on it. With a Ruthlessness, attacking a unit with a bounty, you can literally do more damage to the base than you would have normally by straight attacking the base. It's crazy how strong this guy can actually hit sometimes. So I've gone kind of up and down. Another reason why I really like the red deck, you know, even if you're not getting the bounty and you're just drawing a card when you're defeating a unit with Ruthlessness, it's just a great draw engine to help you refill your hand and kind of fuel those upgrades into the late game. Great card. Love this card so much. Now going into the mid-game events and upgrades, we run 2 copies of Power of the Dark Side just because this is such a powerful, impactful card, but you do need to line it up. And the reason I run 2 of it and not 3 of it, 1, space because I need the upgrades and I can't run a ton of removal. And 2, I found that if I would spend time turn 2 playing Power of the Dark Side, I would set myself back too far, because in the mid game is when you really want to start pushing damage. So you want to play those units to be available for you to start upgrading them. Power of the Dark Side is really in here to kind of offset the field after you've been trading, and then, you know, you're making those value trades. Your units likely have more HP. You have shielded units. You're making valuable trades with your opponent's units, and that way your opponent is going to overextend themselves with a unit play, and that's when you use Power of the Dark Side to take advantage of them. This is not a card that you want to slow down the game with. This is a card that you want to make them overextend their units and then punish them for it. Next up, we have 2 copies of Fell the Dragon. This card in the meta is becoming better and better in the meta. This is a slower deck, so we definitely wanted some removal to answer the end game units. So this is that for us, the Fell the Dragon. Answer those end game units because we're likely going to get there. We have a lot of healing in this deck. So Fell the Dragon is an easy add in this deck. And then closing out the mid-game events, we have 2 copies of Takedown. This is, of course, to help us with the aggro match, answering Kylo Ren, Sabine on deploy. Very good for us to do that and slow down the game for us. Additionally, it just serves as that kind of that mid-game removal card that can help you out. So a little bit of removal, a fair amount of upgrades. That's what this deck is going for. Definitely a mid-rangey, grindy deck that kind of bursts your opponents without them realizing it. So now going into the more late-game units, we have probably one of the best units in the deck, which is Super Commando Squad. Every time I play this unit, it's incredible. It's an incredible unit. It comes out 4/4 with the shield, so it's a 5/4 with the shield. At 5 power with Gar Saxon ability, it's going to pretty much take out any mid-game unit that your opponent can play. It's going to do a ton of damage. And then, of course, after they take out the shield, throw an upgrade on it like an Electro Staff or a Ruthlessness, and then just run the field with this Sentinel to protect you, and while pushing an insane amount of damage. So now we do play 1 copy of Survivor's Gauntlet. I do like this card. It's in the deck to push out just that little bit of extra damage, and I have won several games where I say attach Ruthlessness to a ground unit, push in that extra 3 damage, and then swing with Survivor's Gauntlet, move the Ruthlessness to Survivor's Gauntlet, and then hit for an additional 3 damage. It's a way to squeak out extra damage. It's a way to move around your shields from long pike. There are a lot of fun things you can do with this card. I do only have it at 1 because it's one of those really situational cards, but when it does line up, you can actually win the game with this card. So that's why I do slot 1 of it, but not more than 1, because again, it's very, very situational, but when it lines up, it's amazing. Going into the top end late game units, this card, I cannot overstate how powerful it is in Gar Saxon. Cargo Juggernaut, it's just so good. I've won so many games with Cargo Juggernaut. Putting down that 6-5 with Gar Saxon, shielded heal 4, the tempo that you get from this card, the value, call this card Value Town, okay? It just, so many games, it'll let you win. Against aggro, it can help you offset and just push out that last little bit of damage you need to win the game. Very, very strong card. Anything with the shield is good in Gar Saxon. Gar Saxon is blue, so you're going to always have that blue unit to be able to heal on deploy. Just incredible card. I can't overstate it. I literally would play 5 of it if I could. And the final late game unit that has gone in and out of the meta, but is one of the strongest cards in Gar Saxon, is Count Dooku. I've gone up and down on this card. I've played this card at 1. I played this card at 2. I eventually settled on this card at 3 because it is so incredible to have that takedown-esque ability, as well as putting down a 6-power late-game unit to push out insane damage. Count Dooku is very sticky. It is hard for your opponent to remove Count Dooku, both because you just killed a unit, and then also, additionally, he has a shield. So you're going to be able to get that 6 damage in. Just so incredibly strong. So many late game units have 6 HP. You know, Han unit does. Poe, Wrecker. A lot of late game units have 6 HP. So Count Dooku fits perfectly in to that late game fray where he's pushing an incredible amount of damage, giving you a tempo swing, and helping you seal games left and right. So going into the sideboard and what you'll want to put in particular matchups, much of the sideboard is dedicated to the aggro match because this deck is a little slow. So it does struggle against aggro a little bit. It is very, very strong against anything mid-range, anything slower, because it's such, Gar Saxon is such a value engine. With the healing, the shields, and the extra power, he has such a value engine going effortlessly without you even trying. So as long as the game goes long, you will out-attrition your opponent. However, if you play an aggro deck that's low to the ground, it can be difficult. So we dedicate a lot of our sideboard to combating the decks that are low to the ground, like Sabine or Yellow Han or Yellow Boba. So we do have the trifecta, the finishing of the 2 copies of Moisture Farmer in here. Again, against decks that 2 HP, that 2 healing is going to matter a lot. You want to consider adding this in. Additionally, we do have 2 copies of Devotion in the side as well. So it's a really nice combo to be able to attach Devotion to the Moisture Farmer for actually a 6 damage swing. You know, 2 damage to the base, heal 4. Huge. Devotion is a really good card against low to the ground decks, especially in this deck because you get 2 power out of it. So it's actually a 4 damage swing for 2 in Gar Saxon. Incredible card. And then likewise, we do run 2 copies of Top Target to be able to combo with Jango Fett, and then also combo with the Punishing One, and then likewise just give us that little bit of extra early game healing to be able to combat the aggro decks. So this is the aggro kind of setup that we would run. What I would recommend for you dropping against aggro decks, I would drop a couple copies of Count Dooku. I would probably drop the copy of Survivor's Gauntlet. And then potentially I would drop, because you're running a lot of non-units, I would probably drop the Rich Reward just because you don't want to play that slow. I would probably drop the copy of Brutal Tradition for the same reason you don't want to play that slow. And then I may leave it at that. Something 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's about it. I might keep, say, 1 or 2 copies of Count Dooku in just to be able to seal out the late game. But 9 times out of 10 against aggro decks, you're not going to be getting to that Count Dooku. You want to make sure that you draw what you need early game against aggro. Like, if you're in a situation where you're not drawing what you need against aggro, you'll just lose the game. That's why it may seem bad to take out our top end, because we want those to seal the game. But really, we just need to get there, right? We just need to get to the late game, get to our deploy. Now, against more of the mid-rangey and control decks, we have some ads that we consider. We have 2 copies of Crate Dragon for games that are going to go super, super long, which does happen. Games that grind out really long, if they end up removing a lot of our units, we can add in the Crate Dragon to help us just kind of be that late game bomb that we don't play in the main deck, that typically we wouldn't really get there, but we can get there against those decks that try to stall us out and try to grind us. We can outgrind them with the Crate Dragon. We do play a single copy of Pre-Vizsla. I like this card to steal shield, steal experience, and potentially steal other upgrades. Just a really incredible stat line for 7, and then taking that upgrade away from the opponent. In certain matchups like Luke, Tarkin, and Rey, I would add this in, and it's a really strong card. And then likewise, we run a single copy of Rival's Fall in the side, just for, say, the Boba match. So I hope you enjoyed this deck profile video for Gar Saxon. This has been my pet deck that I've been working on, but I think this deck has incredible potential. Just the passive +1, making all of your upgrades and your shields and experience just better. There are so many options for Gar Saxon, so many different ways to build it. I do like the red version because I love Ruthlessness. I love Jango Fett. So this is the one that I've been playing and sticking with. Please try this deck out, and let me know in the comment section if you enjoy the deck. It's a really fun deck to play. Thank you for joining me on this Star Wars Unlimited deck profile video. We'll be coming out with a ton more Star Wars Unlimited deck profiles and opinion-based videos for Star Wars Unlimited. So if you want to catch all those videos on Star Wars Unlimited, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned to Random Number Gaming. And as always, turn your dial to RNG for the best gaming guides and deck profile videos.